So we have Tim in the ThoughtWorks Chicago office in person, along with attendees from Chicago Tech Talks being hosted by Chris. So he will be managing the Q&A for Chicago. We also have a live stream in ThoughtWorks New York office, along with attendees from Products with Purpose Meetup, which is hosted by myself. And then we have people who are joining on the Zoom as well. And Hannah on the Zoom is going to be hosting the chat, Q&A in the chat for Zoom later. So most of us here, I think, on the call work in tech, but if you don't, you surely use the internet and technology every day in your lives. But many of us don't stop to consider the impact of technology on the environment, since all of the servers running and data being transferred and behind the scenes and electricity use is hidden from us. And it's only really recently that the tech industry is starting to kind of recognize this impact and become accountable for it. And whichever angle that you come at it, we're seeing, groups like business, mission-driven businesses, products with purpose, tech for good, sustainability. All of these are recognizing that business and our economy exist within society, which exists within the planet. And we can't have a business or economy without people, and people wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the planet. And so responsible businesses shouldn't be just looking at the economic and financial returns and impact and externalizing all of their impact on the environment and society, but instead they should be looking at a triple bottom line approach known as 3 Ps: people, planet, and profit. And this is what B corporations do. They're purpose-driven, for-profit companies that are accountable to shareholders, not just for financial returns like traditional businesses are, but also for return and value across all 3 of these areas. So we're seeing this shifting trend towards business as a force for good in the world. And here's just a couple of quick examples of some of the factors that are driving that. There's growing urgency about our impact on the environment. The latest IPCC report says we have 12 years to avoid catastrophic effects of climate change. The UN released a report just a couple of days ago saying 1 million species are now facing risk of extinction. Social preferences are shifting in this direction as well. So market research by BBMG and GlobeScan shows that 40% of consumers are aspirationals, who are a group that care about both the design and the quality of products and services and companies that they support, but also their environmental and social impact. And so if you add this to the kind of green segment of 26% of the population, you have 66% of the global population who are making their purchasing decisions based on social and environmental factors, as well as their employment decisions as well. One of the major reasons why companies become B corporations is to retain talent. And then on the business and financial side, we see ESG reporting, which is environmental, social, and governance or business ethics, becoming mainstream. At least 17 stock exchanges globally are recommending companies report on this as part of listing on their stock exchange. And as of 2018, 92% of S&P 500 companies have a sustainability report on their website, and 78% of them issued a written report. So right now, there are a lot of companies leading in this space with mission and purpose as responsible businesses, and it's kind of a competitive advantage, but it won't be too long until it's table stakes. So in today's talk, we're going to hear from Tim Frick about the journey of how his digital agency Mightybytes became a B corporation and redefined their company practices to put sustainability at the heart of everything that they do. By using the B Impact Assessment tool to measure their social and environmental impact, it allowed them to understand areas they can improve and leading to innovative approaches for designing new products and services. So Mightybytes has designed a design framework for crafting more sustainable digital products and services, which is outlined in Tim's book, Designing for Sustainability, and which his talk is going to cover. Tim started Mightybytes, which is one of the oldest independent digital agencies in Chicago, in early 1998. He's also the author of 4 books on digital strategy and sustainable design, which are used at higher learning institutions around the world. He regularly presents at conferences. He's given a TED Talk on digital sustainability and also offers workshops on sustainable design, measuring impact, and problem solving in the digital economy. So please let's give a warm welcome to Tim, and I'll hand over to.
Hi. Thank you, Natalie. I don't have to give a lot of my slides now. That was a really great intro. My name is Tim. I apologize if I sound a little bit like this. I've been kind of struggling with a cold this week, so my apologies. I may dive for the water bottle at any given moment. As Natalie was saying, I own a company called Mightybytes. We're a small digital agency on the north side up by Wrigley Field on the Ravenswood corridor of business, an area that actually incidentally has more B Corps than any other area in the city of Chicago. So we like to call it B Corp Row, even though the breweries on the other side of the tracks like to call it Malt Row. So we have a little friendly kind of just sparring with them. Turns out lots of beer too. We have been around since '98. We work with a lot of mission-driven organizations, a lot of blue-chip clients, a lot of big nonprofits, the city of Chicago and stuff like that. As Natalie was saying, we help a lot of them solve all kinds of different problems. We do that in kind of 4 categories of work. We do strategy and consulting with them, so lots of workshops and collaboration exercises and human-centered design stuff. We do design and UX. We do build and deploy, so we build digital solutions and deploy them out. And then we do a lot of digital marketing stuff, SEO optimization, continuous improvement, et cetera. So we apply sustainability principles to all of these things, which I'm going to get to the details of which in a minute. I can't talk about that, however, without talking about us becoming a B Corp. So as I said, they're in our 22nd year of business. In 2011, I was on a long distance bike ride called Climate Ride, where we were raising money for environmental causes, and this guy from this nonprofit called B Lab started talking about how his nonprofit certifies companies to be better for people, better for planet, and better for their business practices, et cetera. So I found this really intriguing and wanted to learn more, came back and found out that there was a small but growing group of businesses here in Illinois that were doing that. And in 2011, we became the 9th B Corp certified B Corp in Illinois. That process, which I'm going to talk about in a second, kind of opened our eyes up to the kind of business that we could become. We were kind of your standard small digital agency, building websites, moving on a project studio going, kind of moving on to the next. Using the B Corp assessment to become a certified B Corp really kind of opened our eyes up to a new way of doing business. We were so passionate about it that we changed the legal structure of our company. So in addition to being a certified B Corp, we're also an Illinois benefit corporation. And so what that means is that by law, we have to provide a benefit to society, and we have to prove to the world by putting out a report every year saying what that benefit to society actually was. So we shifted our company to balance purpose and profit, and that's a thing that we do every single day. As I said, it's a growing part of a growing global community with a strong local community as well. Some of the organizations that are certified B Corps that you might be aware of are Etsy and Ben & Jerry's and Patagonia. The biggest one that we have here in the Midwest is Kihi. They're a natural foods distributor. They're about a $5 billion company based out in one of the suburbs. There's 2,800 certified B Corps around the world. 64 countries, 150 different industries, all using business as a force for good. We have 24 of those companies here in the state of Illinois. And so in our local B Corp group, which we call our B Local group, we have a community that does a bunch of different events. So we host events and talk about different areas of the impact assessment, talk about measuring what matters and what it means to balance profit and purpose in a business. We do a lot of workshops on the B Impact Assessment. This is our office here, and so this is us doing a B Corp workshop with a bunch of other business leaders. We had the mayor of Grand Rapids actually bring a bunch of B Corps from there down, and we did a joint kind of idea sharing from Grand Rapids and Chicago on how business can be used as a platform to expand the good that we're doing, solving social and environmental problems in our area. We also do like volunteer days, so we have a group of businesses that come together and their employees, and we've gone down to the Method soap factory plant and done a community gardening project one day. We've done beach cleanups with the Alliance for the Great Lakes, so we usually do that about once a year or so. Our collective vision, like of all B Corps, all the 2,800 B Corps that there are, is to redefine success in business and build an inclusive and more sustainable economy. So the biggest thing is like buying from B Corp supports this better way of doing business. And so when B Corps thrive, our entire community thrives, because our goal is to buy from each other and kind of build up this whole new section of the economy. So certified B Corps use this thing called the B Impact Assessment. It's at bimpactassessment.net. Anybody can use it. There are over 50,000 organizations around the world that actually use the assessment. Only 2,800 of them have gone through the rigorous process of becoming a B Corp. But 50,000 have actually used the impact assessment to measure what matters and figure out what their role is and identify ways to improve their businesses in sustainability, worker engagement, community, that kind of thing. The assessment is broken down into 5 categories: environment, workers, governance, community, and customers. You can get a possible 200 total points. There has never been a business that's gotten to that point. The highest businesses typically are around 150, 160. In order to become a certified B Corp, you have to get at least 80 points. So in order to get your certification and get that kind of stamp with a B in the circle, you have to answer a number of different questions in each of these categories. The environment has a lot to do with supply chain and the workers. They talk about like what's your lowest, what benefits do you offer, what's your lowest paid employee versus your highest paid employee, what's the ratio there, how do you govern your company in terms of transparency, financial accountability, that kind of stuff. What role do you play in your community? So for us, education is a big part. So I do a lot of presentations like this, talking about B Corps, talking about sustainability, and just kind of identifying other areas that a business can engage with its community to do better. And then finally, you're graded on the kind of customers you choose. So for us, that means we work with a lot of nonprofits around town, everyone from the YMCA down to small nonprofits, lots of associations and kind of clients that are aligned with our B Corp values and our mission. And we get scored on that. Diving for the water. So in 2011, when we first certified, it was really kind of an eye-opening experience, not only because it was super difficult. We're a small agency, and it was kind of challenging for us to think about a lot of things that maybe standard agencies aren't thinking about in each of these categories. And so in the environment category, a lot of the questions were about supply chain, and we were thinking as an agency that's kind of, for us, it's mostly pixels and people, and what is it that we can do? And so we asked ourselves the question, how do we bring sustainability principles to the internet? That's the thing that we build for a living every day, and so how can we apply sustainability to that? So we dove in as a company and started doing some research. Learned that 4.2 billion people are online currently. There are billions and billions of devices, as I'm sure we all here know. As of 2011, the internet was the 6th largest user of electricity in the world. The projections are that it will be number 4 by 2025, behind US, China, and India, I believe. So the electricity that is needed to run the internet, it's essentially the largest coal-powered machine on the planet. And in the U.S., only 18% of our power comes from renewable sources. So it's a giant user of electricity and a big contributor to climate change. Plus, it's easy to use and easy to access. And so while a single tweet might generate only 0.02 grams of CO2, 500 million tweets a day, which is what Twitter was doing in 2012, is 10 metric tons of CO2 every single day. And so if you imagine the expansion of Twitter for the last 7 years, that's a huge amount of CO2. Plus, there's also the security and that kind of the security and privacy and all of those issues that come up. A study that was done in 2017 by Northeastern University said that 37% of websites include at least one JavaScript library with a security vulnerability. And so there's also this potential for this big thing, which is powered by coal, to also kind of break down and really cause a lot of problems. In addition, the average web page now is about 4 megabytes. That's a big fat thing that in rural areas and places with small bandwidth is going to be providing a great experience. Plus, when you multiply that times the billions of people are online, that's a lot of data. All of this, as we were doing our research, we realized that it adds up to about 1 billion tons of annual CO2, and it's rising every year. So since that's the thing that we build for a living, we were like, all right, well, what is it that we can do about that? What can we do? And so we started kind of identifying some products and services and things that we could do to kind of move this forward. The first thing that we realized is that no one knew what we were talking about. Like, we started talking to our clients about the excitement of green powered hosting, and we got a lot of side eye and a lot of like, how much extra does that cost? And so we realized the first barrier to entry was kind of awareness. And so we did 3 things. We built a sustainable web design blog, which is at sustainablewebdesign.org. And we just took all of these things and put them together and shared a bunch of resources and kind of talked about the best practices and this framework that we came up for building more sustainable websites and digital products and services. Then we also built a thing called EcoGrader. So you can go to ecograder.com, and it's kind of like HubSpot's website grader. You put your URL in, and it will crawl your URL, and it will spit back a report giving you a score from 10 to 100 about how green your website is based on a bunch of different criteria. We've crawled several million sites with this tool so far, so it also, the collected data has given us the kind of largest collection of internet sustainability data around, which is kind of cool. When you run a report in EcoGrader, it actually gives you a report and tells you, okay, this is how you scored. You scored in these areas, and if you actually scroll down a little bit, it gives you a detailed checklist of all the things that you can do to improve whatever URLs it is that you crawled. And you can send the URL to someone else and share it. All of this ended up culminating in the book that Natalie mentioned that I wrote called Designing for Sustainability for O'Reilly Media. I broke all of these things down, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about each section of the design framework we came up with and just kind of break through. Oh, and also just it's worth mentioning that because of that awareness, I do a lot of this stuff and talk about building community around this idea of sustainability in the internet. And that's been one of the ways that we've been just trying to get the word out to help people figure out what to do here. Just last week or the week before, if you Google Sustainable Web Manifesto, there are other companies around the world, a lot of other B Corps that have gotten together and put a manifesto together about the practices that you need to do to make a more sustainable internet. So it's worth going and signing that. We did get some press and some kind of updated content around this stuff. Fastco on their co-design blog wrote about the rise of green UX and talked about some of these things. Last year, Mozilla's Internet Health Report talked about the electricity use of the internet and mentioned a few of the things that we built. And then just a couple of days ago, Wired in the UK actually did a thing about YouTube's carbon footprint. They talked about sustainable web design and the things that you can do. So the word is getting out there. Bigger media and press are picking it up. So there is some movement afoot on this, which is very exciting and encouraging. That being said, we're part of an agency community of 120,000 in the United States, 560,000 across the world. So there are things that we could collectively do that would really potentially make a huge difference. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what those things are now, and just talk a little bit about sustainable design in practice. And this is, for most of you, since you're an agency and probably a lot of you work in tech, a lot of this stuff is going to seem like common sense to you. But I am amazed at how many projects that I've seen where these things that are, oh yeah, that's totally a best practice, or that's totally the thing that we should be doing, fall by the wayside and don't end up getting done. And decisions are made that cut corners on projects that none of these things end up, getting paid attention to. Freitag is a company out of Europe that actually rewards their customers for making more sustainable shipping options and stuff like that. So, helping users make more sustainable choices when they're purchasing things and making decisions on websites and digital products. And then helping them accomplish tasks quickly, minimizing the number of steps possible, and then not putting proprietary or blockers in their way, like pop-ups or proprietary technology, stuff like that. There's a lot longer. There's a reason there's a whole book about this, because there's a lot longer, but I'm just going to here kind of talk about the quick upload level things. And also applying, there are 1 billion people on the earth potentially that have disabilities, so making sure that you're following the web content accessibility guidelines. This is one of those things that in our experience almost always falls by the wayside until someone gets a lawsuit, and then we get a call saying, we don't know what to do. And so, just kind of building this into your practices and making sure that your accessibility is not only a part of your projects, but then also a part of the training that you give to clients, so that when you hand something over to them, they also know how to make sure that they maintain that level of accessibility and usability. I use the term findability, but it's really essentially means adding search to your site and following SEO best practices. It's another one of those things that I'm amazed how many organizations don't actually do it. They build their website and then they set it over there and they expected it to do magic, and they don't actually, nurture it and feed content to it and make sure that it's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing as a business tool. So just making sure that people can find your content quickly and find what they need quickly uses a lot less energy. This kind of goes back to this whole idea of 4.2 billion people online. If everybody's searching for something, the faster that they can get that stuff done, the better. Performance optimization, following Google and Yahoo's just kind of best practices about fast, speedy sites. Again, another thing that many people kind of overlook in terms of, handing something over to a content team or a marketing team. No one knows how to optimize images. No one knows how to optimize things. And so just making sure that you're following the best practices around performance optimization. One of the things that we found that was helpful with our clients was to create a target page weight budget. Say, all right, none of our pages are going to go over 600K or something like that. And we use that as our target and kind of run that as a budget to make decisions during a product's life cycle, and saying, okay, well, if we're going to go over that, is there a good, valid business reason that we would do that? Otherwise, why aren't we targeting any of this? In addition to this, people leave a site that won't load in 3 seconds or less, so it helps to have smaller pages. And then finally, and this I kind of just look at the news sites and stuff like that. Heavy user tracking scripts, the advertising systems that kind of run in the background on like USA Today and all that kind of stuff. When GDPR came out earlier this year and USA Today created a separate version of their site that had all the tracking scripts removed, it went from 5.5 megabytes down to 500 kilobytes. And so that is the internet I want to use. It's not necessarily the internet that most New York Times and most media companies are actually following. So just kind of, figuring out, I understand those folks got to make money and advertising is the way that they do that. But, there's probably a lot more efficient ways to do what they're doing. And finally, probably the most important one, it seems super simple. It's actually not, is to get green web hosting, hosting powered by renewable energy. There are a lot of green hosts out there. Many of them really suck, unfortunately, or they do. They're owned by like a company, for instance, like Endurance International Group, which owns 50 to 60 web hosts, all of which are super cheap and basically you would never know that they're owned by Endurance International Group. Because they all go under their separate branding. But essentially, when you move from Site 5 to, say, HostGator because you had a horrible experience because your site always went down and all that kind of stuff, someone over at Endurance is just flipping a couple switches and moving you from one server to another. So it's really not, and they say they're green, and oftentimes what they do is they purchase what are called unbundled recs, which is better than nothing. But when you are purchasing unbundled recs and not the electricity that comes with them, you're actually just kind of greenwashing and buying PR. And so, the good hosting providers are the ones that can provide great renewable, direct renewable energy sources, but then also have good customer service, reliable uptime. Believe it or not, it's hard to find all of that in one company. We actually went on a 6-year journey trying to solve that problem. And we literally tried every single green hosting provider out there, and every single one of them failed us in one way or another. And we ended up, believe it or not, which is not really the default way that I would go as a small business owner. I want to support other small business owners. So that's kind of where we started. We had big problems with that. We ended up with Google. It turns out that they're the largest non-utility investor in renewable energy on the planet. And so if you look at the amount of money they spend in terms of other big tech companies on renewable energy, we decided with the amount of reliability, security, all of the commitments that they've made, that it made a good decision for us. I'll add that since then, we've added Pantheon, a layer on top of that, to our own hosting. Google is carbon neutral. Their 46% of their energy mix is directly from renewable energy, and the rest is offsets and RECs. Adding Pantheon, which sits on top of Google, for us as a digital agency, just streamlined our whole, like, hosting our clients' projects and stuff like that so much easier, and it's really made a huge difference for us. Finally, if you want to go on this journey yourself, you can find a web green host at greenwebfoundation.org. They're based out of Sweden, I believe, and we use their API for EcoGrader. So when you run your URL, there's a green hosting component, and it'll tell you whether or not you're hosted green. And we use the API of their database of all the green web hosts around. And this is what I found to be the largest database of green hosts around. Finally, I think taking a step back, those are all kind of practical. I'm going to build a website, and this is what I should do. Thinking about circular design principles in general, and looking at the larger picture of kind of what your digital products and services are going to do for your organization is a really good, worthwhile thing to think about. IDEO and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation put the Circular Design Guide together. It's super helpful, has all kinds of really great methods, and a lot of kind of videos and educational materials to kind of help people understand what circular design processes are. One example is just, and something that we see every day, especially with our nonprofit clients, they have an RFP, they want a project that needs to be done, and they aren't necessarily thinking in terms of it as a service, but they're thinking of it in terms of a finite product. And so, you know, think about like Lyft versus owning a car, you know, like turning your digital products into services and servicizing them, or doing what they call a service flip, is something that can help you better manage resources over time for your digital products and services. I could go into that for there's a whole bunch of stuff there, but I'm just bringing that up here, just say that, you know, well, much of the stuff in designing for sustainability is really roll your sleeves up, hands-on, here's how to build a better website, or here's how to build a better digital product. The circular design stuff really applies to all the systems and products of a business, and it helps you kind of think on more regeneratively. Much of designing for sustainability was about doing less damage. This is really about figuring out how to create regenerative principles and regenerative solutions that are more sustainable long-term. So I'm going to end with a few advocacy options or resources and share this with you. One of the things that you can do, the quickest thing you can do, is ask companies that you work with to switch. These could be social media companies, it could be your hosting company, it could be any number of organizations that you work with. Social media is a great way to do that. There's also the Click Clean report from Greenpeace. They put this out every couple of years, and they basically assess the tech sector, and they go through and say, all right, these are the organizations that are really made you know, commitment to renewable energy. Twitter, not so great, turns out. And so you can actually go, you see the little buttons down along the bottom there. You can go and you can, you know, tweet to them or message them and say, hey, you know, what's this scorecard all about? Why are you getting an F from your lack of transparency, et cetera? And just, you know, sharing this idea out there and helping more awareness come, so that customers, or excuse me, companies won't switch unless they know it's a customer priority. So making sure that they're aware of that is something that's relatively easy to do. You could switch to Ecosia. I don't know if anybody here knows what that is, but it's a search engine that plants a tree every single time you run a search, which is that they're also certified B Corp, pretty awesome. They have a Chrome extension, which basically makes them your default search engine, and they have planted literally millions of trees at this point, and since they've been around. And so that's another simple thing to do. Even though Google is a carbon neutral company, I love the idea of actually giving back and planting trees and stuff when I'm looking for information. You can, there's an API called Cloverly. You can add renewable energy credits to any online transaction. So for a nominal fee, like a shipping fee, et cetera, you can make the shipping of whatever, like say you purchase something online, and the shipping, you know, has a certain amount of energy or carbon footprint to it. You can actually offset with that using renewable energy credits, and it's an online API that you can add to your applications. That's at cloverly.com. And then finally, there's a Sustainable UX as a conference, which is actually how I met Natalie. I've spoken to it at a number of them. It's an online conference run through Google Hangouts in February of every year. Speakers from all around the world talking about all kinds of different ways to incorporate design and sustainability. It's some really thought-provoking stuff and some really great speakers. It's at sustainableux.com. And it's their speaker, I believe speaker applications are going to be opening up soon. And finally, this year, November 14th of 2019 is World Usability Day. This year's theme is actually the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it's designing for the future that we want. The UN in 2015 put out 17 large goals they call Agenda 2030. As Natalie was talking, we've got 12 years to meet this agenda. So going through and figuring out how you can use this as a framework to run your own organizations or the projects that you're doing. We're going to be running a workshop at Mightybytes on World Usability Day in November. So if you're interested in that, let me know and I'll give you a card or whatever, we can connect. I think that was it. So I know that we were going to run some questions. Do we have any? Sorry, was that too abrupt? I just got stopped.
No, this is Hannah on the Zoom phone line. We don't have any in the chat, but I did want to pull up one from earlier in your talk and maybe put it out to the group. Just curious, about the switch that you made as a company to being a B Corp, and curious what trade-offs you had to consider in making that decision, and what you might recommend to anyone who wants to come to their company and propose becoming a B Corp or propose that switch, knowing that it's probably, there might be some pushback. So what are the drawbacks and what are some strategies for making that switch?
Yeah, I can talk about pros and cons of that. I'll start with the pros because I think the pros are more compelling. There's now been research done that companies that follow this way of doing business are actually outperform their peers. They have longer employee retention and better employee engagement. I mean, there's a whole list of things now that they're showing since B Corps have been around for 12 years now. That they're showing that these companies are really perform well in the marketplace. So there's a lot of data there that can be used to make that case, to say, okay, if you want to better engage your employees, if you want to have better performance, if you want to create better products and services and have happier customers and deal with the kind of rising customer pressure that's coming from all angles, this is a great way to kind of consider doing that. That being said, every company's resources are finite and you can only do what your resources allow. And so what I've seen happen is that companies get super excited and they dive in face first and don't necessarily think, and we did this ourselves, don't necessarily think about what your capacity will allow. And so we got really super excited and really jazzed about this in the early days, and then kind of took a step back and said, okay, of all of these things, all of this stuff's really cool, and it certainly helped us build awareness, but what are the things that we can support long term and weave into the kind of day-to-day of our business, and what are the things that we just kind of don't have the capacity for? And so we did an audit of that in 2016, and we kind of juggled some things around. And for instance, one of the things that we decided to shift was we did a lot of pro bono work, and we switched that to become a 1% for the Planet member. So now we give 1% of our top line revenue, our top sales, every year to environmental nonprofits and charities in exchange for we don't necessarily do pro bono work anymore. And the reason for that was we had a few pro bono commitments that we were on track to do, and we were committed to doing them, whether the employees wanted to do them or not, whether we had the capacity or not. And so it became a lot easier for us to do something like being a 1% for the Planet member, which is no small commitment. I mean, 1% of your top line revenue is a challenge to do for over the course of a whole year. But we were really, we felt that was a easier way to make a big mark while also being able to manage it in a way that helped us kind of balance the up and down of our client work and stuff like that. So that's just one example of a balancing act that we have, but it's constant and it's iterative. And so making sure that we're always balancing those things and weighing whether or not we can can support things over the long term. We do a lot of like safe to try experiments. We'll try something and figure out if we're getting the data that we want and the success metrics that we want out of it. And if we're not, we have to make a hard decision to cast that initiative off. For instance, in 2014, we built the world's first online marketplace for just B Corps, like just selling B Corp products, and it didn't really do very well. And it was kind of ahead of its time, and part of it was a side project of a web design agency, and so it didn't get necessarily the full commitment that it would if it was its own startup. But we were looking, we had a set of metrics, and we had a reasoning to go into the project in the first place to kind of learn a lot more about e-commerce and kind of set this up as a project. But we weren't tracking by our metrics, and so we made the hard decision to close it down 7 or 8 months into it. Because we found it was like sucking resources off of the company, and so we had to balance that out. So it's just a couple examples of the kind of balancing act that companies need to do. I think it's still worthwhile. You had a question there?
Hello. So you mentioned a lot about existing companies that are trying to get B Corp certified or switch over to being B Corps. What about resources for entrepreneurs that want to start a company and may have different options for the kind of incorporation they want to do, and maybe B Corp could be one of those? Does it have to match with the business plan, or are there resources around that?
Are you talking about like legal structure?
Yeah.
Actually, yeah. It's there are some, impact investment. If you're looking for investment money, that's a whole separate thing, because some investors just won't be interested in investing in a company that they're not going to get an immediate return on. That being said, with the rise of this way of doing business, concurrently there's been a big rise in impact investing. So if this is the kind of business that you want to be, I would say use the B impact assessment from the get-go. You can't become a certified B Corp until you've been in business, I think, for at least 2 years. And so they want to show that you're a long-term committed thing, but you can still anybody can use the B impact assessment and use that to kind of guide the principles of their organization and figure out what the metrics are that kind of matter to the organization. And the reality is, as I was saying earlier, is that in most cases, you're going to find that your business is going to be better for that anyway. In terms of the actual legal structure, the benefit corporation status, for us, it means that if like some fossil fuel company for whatever crazy reason decided they wanted to buy Mightybytes, we're a little bit protected there because our mission is part of our legal DNA, and so we can protect the mission of the business in the evidence in the matter of a sale. I'm sure good lawyer worth their salt would figure out a way to be able to dismantle that if they really, really wanted to. But if you're like BP and you're trying to buy an agency like Mightybytes, for instance, which is crazy and would never happen, but the point being that these two diametrically opposed things probably shouldn't be together anyway. And by putting the line in the sand and saying we are this kind of company that stands for this kind of business, you also attract other companies and other organizations and other investors, and there's a whole global community out there of people that are committed and passionate about doing this way of business. And so by becoming part of this community, and it doesn't have to be just B Corp, it can be Conscious Capitalism, Social Enterprise Alliance, there's a number of different organizations and social enterprise formats out and structures out there. You can do that, and you're going to have an immediate kind of tribe or collection of resources available to you in other people that have gone down that road. That makes sense? Any other questions? I keep turning over there like they're sitting there. Yeah, Neural.
I do have some from the chat. I want to let the room also speak. If there
We've got
are
one in the room here, and then maybe you can tell right as soon as that's done. We'll talk about go to the chat.
Thanks. You mentioned buying out as an example. So when let's say some companies are bought out, like Ben & Jerry's got bought out by Unilever, and I hear Method Soap got out by SC Johnson. How does that work with the B Corporation framework? Since there's a parent company that sort of calls the shots over the new division.
So, the larger organizations seem to be learning a lesson that they're seeing the success of companies like Ben & Jerry's, and they're like Campbell's bought Plum Organics, Unilever bought Ben & Johnson, they bought Seventh Generation, they bought Ben & Jerry's. There have been a number of these kind of, larger organizations, conglomerates that are buying B Corps because they're seeing the success that those organizations are having, and they also are seeing the pressure from consumers to, act in a more responsible manner. And so I can't, given that I've never been a part of any of those transactions, I really can't say from an insider's perspective on the pros and cons of that. I know that when Method was acquired by SC Johnson, there was questions about whether or not they were going to be able to remain a certified B Corp and be part of our community. They've been super active with us here, and it's been really awesome. They have that amazing plant down in Pullman. They've invited us down to go do the service volunteer days. They've hosted our B Corp events. They provide resources and all that kind of stuff. So it's really been great to have them as part of the community. And so we were really kind of bummed out, but they decided that it was okay that they could keep their B Corp status. I think part of it is when you're talking about shareholders who don't understand this, the first thing that they might kind of knee-jerk react to is like, oh, well, this is going to cut into my profits. We can't have that. And the whole purpose of this kind of way of doing business is to grow a shared prosperity, so everybody wins, as opposed to short-term thinking. It's really about long-term thinking. And so people who are making short-term decisions probably don't belong in these communities anyway.
I have a quick question from New York.
Sure.
Okay, cool.
Where is the voice coming from?
First of all, I found it really interesting, like you're measuring the carbon footprint of like a website loading and things like that is really fascinating. And I was wondering if there's a tool that, like, we tend to measure an algorithm by space and time complexity. I'm wondering if there's like a carbon emissions kind of or carbon footprint kind of measure or tool that measures that. So we could like put in like a piece of code and see what is the carbon footprint of this code?
Sure. Yeah. That's the $1 million question. And in fact, I dedicated an entire chapter of designing for sustainability to that very question, interviewed dozens of people in all kinds of different industries. And the best answer I got was it's complicated. Since then, I will say there's an agency called in the UK called Whole Grain Digital. They're also B Corp. They're actually very similar to Mightybytes in terms of the kind of work that they do, the kind of clients they work with. Their equivalent of EcoGrader is a thing called Website Carbon, so it's websitecarbon.com. And they've created the first kind of online carbon calculator. It crawls a URL and gives an estimate of what the actual CO2 emissions are for that URL. So that's the closest thing that I've seen. I know that it's only been out for a few months. I'm sure they're making lots of tweaks to kind of finesse the algorithm that they're doing. They're also the people who put the Sustainable Web Manifesto that I mentioned earlier together. So that's the closest. It's websitecarbon.com. That's the closest thing that I've seen to date.
Cool. Thank you.
So we have a question from the chat, specifically. So the question says, I'm surprised that Google is the only reliable green hosting provider today. Curious if you to hear if you have any idea why that's the case. What is so difficult about it, and what are some examples of failures from smaller players?
Sure. Yeah, and I don't want to say that they're the only reliable hosting provider. In our experience, when we went through a lot of these hosting, like Green Geeks is a great organization, AISO.net is a great organization. Our experience with them is we worked with them, and what they offered in terms of renewable energy and kind of commitment to a brighter, more sustainable future, we didn't see the same level of commitment in terms of security, uptime, customer support, things that we needed to run our business. And so we ended up having challenges with many of these smaller organizations because they just couldn't provide the level of support that we wanted alongside the kind of commitment to renewable energy. And so we ended up going with Google because it was the thing that we could find. And we had our own struggles with that because Google Cloud Platform is kind of just a blank slate and you do whatever you want with it. And we're not a hosting provider, we're a design agency, and so we made our own set of mistakes with this kind of stuff, and having the Pantheon layer that I mentioned earlier made that a lot easier for us. That being said, like I said, AISO.net, Green Geeks, there's other organizations out there, Canvas Host, which is a B Corp out of Portland. They're great companies. They have really great services. They just didn't work well for us and the kind of clients that we have. So I would definitely suggest people vet the organization that they're looking for, look for information on their website about their uptime, their level of security and customer service, and can you get someone on the phone when you need someone, and then balance that with like their actual commitment to renewable energy. Are they just buying unbundled recs for cheap and trying to buy PR, or are they actually making a commitment where they're proliferating the advancement of renewable energy?
A question related to that. Specifically, you talked a little bit about greenwashing and how some of the other hosts that you initially had started with were at least presented themselves as being green, but actually when you dug down, they weren't. Is there a resource or a directory or a quick way to understand which things are greenwashing versus which things are more true to the mission? Or is it like a deep dive research every single time?
For us, it was pretty deep. I mean, we were doing this in 2011, 12, 13, and once we finally landed on a solution that we were happy with, we haven't done any recent research on that. I'm always going to trust the Be in the Circle certified B Corp thing before anything else, because I know what a pain in the ass that assessment is. But I also know that what it gets an organization. So an organization that is a certified B Corp, I know is going to be committed to drawing that line in the sand and giving, being a better customer. So I'll immediately go there first. But I think, if a company is really committed to green infrastructure and renewable energy, they usually have a section about that on their website. And that would be the first place I'd go to check and make sure that they're, a lot of them will publish their renewable energy credits. Like I had an actual screen grab of a rec that you get when you purchase a renewable energy credit. They'll publish those on their website. So just kind of, going and checking to make sure that is, that their commitment is deep enough and they're not just kind of putting a stamp of, green hosting on there.
I have a question for you. You talk about choosing Google as a provider, or shrinking the size of web pages, doing lower fidelity images, or not having video play automatically when you get there. But how do you have the conversation with your clients? There's something of like, oh, hey, this helps with accessibility, but
right.
Azure says we're better for government compliance. Amazon has a much better claim to functionality. Things like the little video images when you load a page are popular right now. So how do you persuade them that this is a better way to go?
For us, at the end of the day, it's their decision. We as I mentioned earlier, we got a lot of side eye and kind of how much extra does that cost from clients when we first started talking about this, mostly because they didn't know what we were talking about. We used to lead with the green thing, and we learned that wasn't what they really cared about. What they care about is performance, and you can easily make the case for performance, happier users, happier customers for these kinds of decisions. And so we just started building that stuff into our process. And so, we talk about it, and in our proposals, we'll talk about us being a B Corp and the kind of practices that we use and why they're better and why we're committed to renewable energy. We certainly mention that, but we don't necessarily lead with it. At the end of the day, if they want that video background, if they're absolutely just will not live without it, who are we going to, they're paying us to do this. So, we'll give them all the compelling reasons why they shouldn't do that and why users could leave and why people in rural areas would not be able to load that video, or we'll build something with contingency plans in it. So if someone's on a, mobile phone in a rural area, they just get a little image or something like that, But a lot of times that stuff, we don't lead with that stuff for our clients. It's just our job is to kind of guide them and give them the best recommendations that we can. Collaboration is the cornerstone of all the work that we do with them. So it's a lot of conversations and things like discovery workshops and stuff like that, where we're having this and trying to help them understand the value of it. Anything else? Again, keep looking over there as if they're looking over my shoulder. Hi. Neural, you got a question?
How energy intensive is video? Is it that much of
how
energy hog
intensive is
compared
video.
compared to static content, or
Yeah,
is
I
there a
mean,
way
I
to
don't
do it
have
better?
any like actual, kilobyte data in front of me. We tend to recommend against that, like any of those auto playing video backgrounds. Just it's aesthetically it's cute, but it's distracting, and people have visual impairments. It might keep them from reading what's in front of it. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why you might not want to do that. So we'll just have those conversations with our clients. I like I said, don't have direct data in front of me, but I could get it for you if you want.
Well, it just seems like the marketing side is sort of telling clients like, video marketing's side of your clients is telling people, oh, well, video drives engagement, and and
Right.
it's a big thing, and people are looking at video and they're not reading text anymore.
Sure, yeah, and I think there's a difference between like a video background looping in the back of your homepage versus a video teaching you how to do something on someone's how-to page or something like that. I definitely agree that like that kind of video is great content, and it's really helpful to people. I encourage our customers who are doing video to make sure that they're getting to where they need to go as quickly as possible in those videos, that those videos are lean, that they are transcripted so that people with disabilities can actually read through content. That also happens to be good for search engines. There's a lot of compelling reasons why you would have video on your website. Just don't have it autoplay as soon as you load up a page.
Can I ask an additional video question? Do you know anything about the different video hosting sites?
Yes, a little bit. Vimeo, in Greenpeace's Click Clean report, Vimeo doesn't get really great grades on Greenpeace's Click Clean scorecard. Whereas YouTube, because they are a champion, they are owned by Google and they're a champion of renewable energy, even though the carbon footprint is huge, Google offsets all of that, and Google actually, they do a ton at making sure that their data centers are as efficient as possible. There was a big story about that a year or two ago where they were using machine learning to make sure they improved data center efficiency by like 40% by just using machine learning algorithms and stuff. So they're really committed to this idea of optimal performance and then offsetting any kind of carbon impact or environmental impact. YouTube is always going to be the default that I would go to because we know that people are going to use it, and it's. But if the content is proprietary, there's a whole other level of, if you got to host it on, was it Bright Cove or something like that, and that's not really necessarily what Mightybytes does. So I don't know that I could make any recommendations there. But like I said, Vimeo and some of the other hosting platforms, if you run them through the Click Clean scorecard, you can get a report card on how efficient they are and how committed to renewable energy they are.
I think we're at the top of the hour here.
Sweet.
So for the folks who are on Zoom in New York, we're going to wrap up and say thank you very much, Tim, for the presentation. And
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.